Amelia sat in her chic New York City home, the quiet hum of traffic outside barely noticeable. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and mischief. Across from her, Nick, Amelia's lover, lounged on the couch, his muscular frame relaxed, a lazy smile playing on his lips. "Babe, you really don't have to worry about money," Amelia said, setting her glass on the table. Her voice was steady, confident. "My loser husband will pay for everything. He is my paycheck. You just need to bring your perfect hot body and satisfy me all the time in there." Nick raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "You really think he won't suspect a thing?" Amelia leaned back, crossing her legs as she considered the question. "Are you kidding? David's too wrapped up in his work to notice anything. As far as he's concerned, I'm the perfect wife. He doesn't have a clue." Nick chuckled, shaking his head. "And what if he finds out?" "He won't," Amelia replied, dismissing the thought with a wave of her hand. "He's practically living at the office these days. I'm just an accessory to his success, something to show off at company events. He has no idea what I'm up to." Nick stood up, crossing the space between them in a few strides. He took the wine glass from her hand and set it aside, leaning in closer. "And what does that make you?" he asked, his voice low, playful. Amelia met his gaze, her lips curling into a sly smile. "It makes me a woman who knows what she wants." Nick's hands moved to her shoulders, pulling her closer until their faces were inches apart. "And what do you want, Amelia?" "I want you," she whispered, her breath warm against his lips. "I want Hawaii. I want to live like a queen without lifting a finger." Nick didn't need any more convincing. He closed the gap between them, capturing her lips in a passionate kiss. His hands roamed her body, and she responded eagerly, pulling him closer. In that moment, the outside world ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, lost in their shared desire and the thrill of their secret affair. As the kiss deepened, Nick's hand trailed down her back, sending shivers of anticipation through her body. Amelia's thoughts drifted to the plans they had been making, their upcoming trip to Hawaii, the luxurious resorts they would stay at, the extravagant meals they would indulge in. David's hard-earned money would fund it all, and he wouldn't even know. Amelia's phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting the moment. She reached for it, glancing at the screen. It was a text from David, her husband. Asterisk, working late again. Don't wait up for me. Asterisk, she smirked, showing the message to Nick. See? He's completely clueless. Nick glanced at the text and then back at her, his smirk returning. To Hawaii, then, he murmured, his lips brushing against her neck, sending another shiver down her spine. Yes, she breathed, her eyes closing as she leaned into him. To Hawaii. As they continued to plan their getaway, Amelia's thoughts briefly flickered to David. She had met him over a decade ago when she was fresh out of college, eager to conquer the world. David had been her first serious relationship, a man who was steady, reliable, and ambitious. He wasn't the most exciting person, but he had a certain charm, a kindness that had drawn her in. Back then, David had been just another young professional trying to make a name for himself in the corporate world. They had bonded over their shared dreams of success, their desire to build a life together. He had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, and she had supported him, playing the role of the devoted girlfriend, then wife. But as the years passed, something had changed. David's focus had shifted almost entirely to his career. Late nights at the office became the norm, and their conversations grew increasingly superficial. He was always talking about the next big project, the next promotion, the next business trip. Amelia had tried to be understanding, to be patient, but she had slowly grown tired of being second to his job. She missed the excitement, the passion they had once shared. And then she met Nick, who was everything David wasn't. He was adventurous, daring, and most importantly, he made her feel alive again. It had started as a harmless flirtation, but it quickly spiraled into something much more intense. Amelia knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the thrill of it was intoxicating. She had grown bored with her life as David's trophy wife, tired of the endless cycle of cocktail parties, business dinners, and charity events. With Nick, she felt free, unburdened by the expectations that came with being Mrs. David Carlyle. "Let's talk about the details," Nick said, snapping her back to the present. He pulled out his phone and opened a travel app. "I've been looking at a few resorts in Maui. This one has a private beach, infinity pools, the works." Amelia leaned over to look at the screen. Her interest piqued. "That looks amazing. We could spend our days lounging by the pool, sipping cocktails, and our wild nights. Well, you know." Nick grinned, pulling her closer. "I like the sound of that. And what about the flights? When do you want to leave?" "Next week," Amelia said without hesitation. "I'll tell David I'm going on a girls' trip. He won't question it." Nick nodded, tapping a few more buttons on his phone. "Done. I'll book everything tonight." Amelia smiled, already picturing herself basking in the Hawaiian sun, far away from the dullness of her life in New York. It was perfect. She had no doubt that David would be none the wiser, too consumed by his work to even notice she was gone. The evening stretched on as they continued to plan, their excitement building with each detail they discussed. They talked about the activities they would do, the restaurants they would dine at, the adventures they would embark on. For Amelia, it was like planning a dream vacation, a fantasy come to life, paid for by the man who barely knew her anymore. As the clock ticked past midnight, Nick stood up, stretching his arms above his head. "I should go," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "We both need to get some rest." Amelia pouted playfully, tugging on his arm. "You don't have to leave. Stay the night." Nick hesitated for a moment before leaning down to kiss her softly. "You know I want to, but we shouldn't push our luck. The neighbors might start to talk." She sighed, reluctantly letting him go. "Fine, but promise me you'll come back tomorrow. We still have a lot to finalize." Nick smiled, his hand lingering on her cheek. "You can count on it." With that, he turned and headed for the door. Amelia watched him go, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. Everything was falling into place. She would have her dream vacation, her time with Nick, and David would be none the wiser. As the door clicked shut behind him, Amelia picked up her phone and opened her messages. She scrolled through her conversations with David, most of them brief and to the point. He rarely had time for anything more. It was almost laughable how easy it was to deceive him, how little he seemed to care. She typed out a quick message. Asterisk just finished up here. See you tomorrow, maybe? Asterisk within seconds, David replied. Asterisk sure. Got a big presentation in the morning. Don't stay up too late. Asterisk Amelia shook her head, a wry smile on her lips. He was so predictable, so focused on his work that he barely noticed anything else. It made her wonder if he even remembered the last time they had gone on a vacation together, or if he had even noticed how distant she had become. Pushing those thoughts aside, she set her phone down and headed for the bedroom. As she slipped under the covers, her mind was already in Hawaii, imagining the warm sand beneath her feet, the sound of the waves, and the feel of Nick's arms around her. This was what she had been missing, what she had been craving for so long. And soon, it would be hers. The sun was relentless as it beat down on the pristine beaches of Maui. Amelia and Nick settled into a private cabana, where the attentive waitstaff regularly brought them cocktails. The sweet scent of tropical flowers mixed with the salty breeze from the ocean, creating an atmosphere of total relaxation. Amelia stretched out on the chaise lounge, her body basking in the sunlight. She let out a satisfied sigh, feeling the warmth on her skin. Beside her, Nick reclined comfortably, his eyes fixed on the shimmering water. This is perfect, Amelia said, her voice filled with contentment as she traced her fingers down Nick's arm. Nick glanced over, a grin spreading across his face. All thanks to your paycheck back home, right? Amelia chuckled, her laughter mingling with the sound of crashing waves. Exactly. And the best part? David's probably stuck in some dreary office, clueless about our little paradise. Nick's smile widened as he leaned over and pressed a kiss to her lips. He doesn't know what he's missing. They spent their days exploring the island, each activity more thrilling than the last. In the mornings, they would venture out to secluded beaches, where they swam in crystal-clear waters and lounged under the sun. Afternoons were reserved for indulgent meals at high-end restaurants. Nick had a talent for finding the best places to eat, and Amelia enjoyed every bite of the exquisite cuisine. One day, as they sipped on fresh pineapple cocktails, Amelia looked around at the luxurious surroundings. "I've never had a vacation like this before. It's like living in a dream." Nick smirked, reaching out to take her hand. "You deserve it. We've worked hard for this, haven't we?" Amelia leaned back, her eyes half closed as she absorbed the beauty of the landscape. "Definitely. And it's so nice to be away from everything, away from David, from work, from all the stress." Nick's fingers intertwined with hers, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Here, it's just us. No worries, no distractions." As the days continued, their activities became a blend of relaxation and adventure. They took a helicopter tour over the island, marveling at the breathtaking views. They went snorkeling, exploring vibrant coral reefs teeming with colorful fish. Each night, they danced at exclusive clubs, their chemistry undeniable as they moved together on the dance floor. One evening, after a particularly exhilarating day of exploring hidden coves, they returned to their cabana just as the sun began to set. The sky transformed into a canvas of orange, pink, and purple hues, casting a romantic glow over the beach. Amelia settled beside Nick, resting her head on his shoulder. She watched the sun sink below the horizon, feeling a deep sense of happiness. "I'm so happy," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "I don't want this to end." Nick wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Who says it has to?" Amelia closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his embrace. "You're right. We'll make this last forever." They remained like that for a while, simply enjoying the tranquility of the moment. As the sky grew darker and the stars began to twinkle, Nick spoke up again. "Have you thought about what comes next?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. Amelia shrugged, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "I haven't really thought about it. I'm just enjoying right now." Nick nodded. "Fair enough. But when we get back, we'll have to figure out how to keep this going." Amelia turned her head to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you mean us? Or the lifestyle?" "Both," Nick said with a grin. "I'm enjoying this too much to let it all fade away." Amelia smiled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well, we'll just have to see. David's oblivious, so that's a start." Nick's fingers slid up to her face, gently cupping her chin. "We'll make it work. Whatever it takes." Their conversation drifted to future plans, their dreams and desires blending seamlessly with the gentle sound of the waves. They talked about places they wanted to visit, things they wanted to experience, and how they could continue their luxurious lifestyle even when they returned to reality. As the night wore on, they moved inside, their energy renewed. They explored each other's desires with a passion that left them both breathless. Their connection was electric, fueled by their shared secret and the thrill of their escapades. The following day was more of the same: fun, indulgence, and intimacy. They woke up late, ordering room service and enjoying a leisurely breakfast in bed. The day was spent by the pool, followed by an afternoon sailing trip where they watched dolphins swim alongside their boat. In the evening, they dressed for dinner, their anticipation palpable. They dined at a rooftop restaurant with stunning views of the ocean, the candlelit table creating an atmosphere of romance. Afterward, they took a moonlit stroll along the beach, their fingers entwined as they talked and laughed. Despite the luxury and indulgence, there was a constant undercurrent of excitement. Every day was a new adventure, every moment a chance to explore their desires. The thrill of their secret affair, combined with the beauty of their surroundings, created a heady mix that made every second feel special. As they lay in bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Amelia felt a deep sense of contentment. The vacation had been everything she had hoped for and more. She knew that when they returned home, things would be different. The thrill of their secret would be replaced by the routine of everyday life, and she would have to confront the reality of her choices. But for now, she was determined to savor every moment. The perfect vacation, the perfect escape, she was living a dream, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. As they drifted off to sleep, Amelia held onto the memory of their time in Maui, knowing that it would be a cherished part of her life forever. The luxury, the excitement, and the passion, Everything had come together to create a magical experience that she would remember for years to come. Amelia's heart was still soaring from the euphoria of her Hawaiian getaway as her plane touched down in New York. The vacation with Nick had been nothing short of magical. Each moment spent in paradise had only cemented her feelings and the bond they had. Returning to her routine life with David felt like an unwelcome intrusion, but she pushed the thought aside, focused instead on the excitement of her next adventure. As they disembarked and made their way through the terminal, Amelia turned to Nick, her eyes alive with enthusiasm. "We should start planning our next trip, maybe somewhere even more exotic." Nick managed a smile, though it was tinged with hesitation. "Let's see how things settle first. We should lay low for a while." Amelia waved off his concern, her mind already racing through a list of potential destinations. "David won't notice anything. He's buried in work. He won't have a clue." They said their goodbyes, and Nick headed to his apartment while Amelia took a cab home. The familiar sight of her brownstone came into view, but today something seemed off. A moving truck was parked out front, and she could see strangers carrying boxes and furniture. Her heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked the nearest mover as she stepped out of the cab. The man, looking puzzled, replied, "We're just finishing up here. The new family is about to move in." Amelia's confusion turned to panic. "New family? This is my house." The mover shrugged, pointing to the front door. "You might want to talk to them inside." Amelia stormed up the steps, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. She flung open the door, her eyes widening in disbelief. The house was almost empty, stripped of everything that had once made it their home. A few stray boxes were scattered around, but her belongings were nowhere in sight. In the center of the living room, a young couple stood, holding hands and beaming with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You must be the previous owner," the woman said with a friendly smile. "We just bought the house last week. The realtor said you had already moved out." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "That's impossible. I didn't sell the house. There must be some mistake." The man frowned, pulling out a folder and flipping through some papers. "The sale went through 2 weeks ago. Your husband, the owner, handled everything." Amelia's heart pounded as she absorbed the information. David had sold their house, and he had done it without her knowledge. Her mind raced, struggling to make sense of the situation. Panic surged through her, and she turned abruptly, racing out onto the sidewalk. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and dialed David's number. The line rang endlessly, but there was no answer. Amelia tried again, her frustration mounting with each failed attempt. Desperately, she checked her banking app, her heart sinking as she saw that her accounts were empty. Everything she had relied on, her home, her money, was gone. David had taken it all and vanished. Her world spun out of control as she staggered back to the front door, staring at the young couple still inside. "Where is he?" Amelia demanded, her voice trembling. "Do you know where he is?" The couple exchanged uncertain glances. "We don't know," the woman said. "The realtor handled everything. We were just given the keys." Amelia slumped against the doorframe, her mind racing through a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and fear gripped her as she tried to understand how David could have done this. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty rooms, Amelia's thoughts turned to her next move. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. She rushed back to her cab, giving the driver hurried instructions to take her to the nearest police station. At the precinct, she explained her situation to an officer at the front desk. "My husband has sold our house and emptied our bank accounts. I can't find him, and I have no idea where he's gone." The officer took down her information and assured her they would look into it, but Amelia could see that the wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly. She left the station feeling more lost than ever, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. Determined to track down David, she began her own investigation. She visited the realtor's office, hoping to find some clue about David's whereabouts. The receptionist at the desk was sympathetic but unable to provide much information beyond what she already knew. "He handled everything through email and phone," the receptionist said. "I'm afraid I don't have any additional details." Frustrated but resolute, Amelia tried to reach her lover, but he didn't answer the phone. She even know where he is living. So she went to a motel. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia's search became all-consuming. She contacted old friends, colleagues, and anyone who might have had recent contact with David. She filed a report with the police, but the lack of leads made progress slow. Her search became a daily ritual, endless phone calls, visits to places David had frequented, and constant online searches. One day, while sifting through old emails, Amelia found a message from David's former business partner. It was an innocuous note about a business meeting that David had missed. It mentioned a foreign conference that David was supposed to attend. Amelia's heart raced as she realized David might have fled to another country. She researched the conference, discovering that it had taken place in a small town abroad. She knew she had to follow this lead. Scraping together what little resources she had left, Amelia booked a flight to the foreign town, her heart filled with a mix of hope and dread. She was determined to find David and get answers, no matter what it took. But that effort didn't work. She flew back to her place. Amelia couldn't help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed. From the height of her luxurious escape in Hawaii to the harsh reality of losing everything, it was a sobering reminder of how quickly things could unravel. With renewed determination, she set out on her quest, driven by the need for closure and the hope of finding some semblance of justice. Finally, Nick reached out to her, came to her place. He tried to comfort her, but the weight of their new reality took its toll on him too. The extravagant lifestyle they had enjoyed was unsustainable without David's money, and Amelia's world seemed to collapse with each passing day. "Amelia, we need to talk," Nick said one evening, his voice heavy with frustration. They sat in the small motel room that had replaced their opulent living conditions, the contrast stark and painful. "What is it?" Amelia asked, her gaze fixed on a pile of bills that seemed to grow every day. "I can't keep doing this," Nick said, rubbing his temples. "We're out of money. We need to figure something out, or I don't see how this can work." Amelia looked up, her eyes full of desperation. "I'm trying, Nick. I've hired a private investigator. I'm doing everything I can to find David." Nick's expression softened slightly, but his frustration remained. "It's been weeks, nothing's coming up. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep going like this." "I know," Amelia said, her voice cracking, "but I can't give up. I have to find him." The search for David became Amelia's sole focus. She threw herself into the investigation, pouring what little money she had into it. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but David remained elusive. The private investigator, though diligent, had found no trace of him. It was as if David had vanished without a trace. Desperation gnawed at Amelia as her resources dwindled. She sold off the last of her valuable possessions and maxed out her credit cards. She struggled to pay for even basic necessities. Her once luxurious lifestyle seemed like a distant dream, overshadowed by the harsh reality she now faced. Amelia's friends, once close and supportive, distanced themselves. They were unwilling to be associated with someone who had fallen so far from grace. The social circle that had once embraced her now seemed like a distant memory. Even Nick, who had initially been her rock, grew weary of the constant drama and financial strain. Their relationship, once filled with passion and excitement, eroded under the pressure of their mounting problems. One evening, Nick packed his things and left, leaving Amelia alone to face her new reality. The years that followed were harsh and unforgiving. 11 years passed, each one harder than the last. Amelia's life was reduced to a daily struggle for survival. She lived on the streets, begging for scraps and seeking refuge in shelters. Despite the hardship, her determination to find David never wavered. She clung to the hope that she would eventually locate him and confront him for the wrongs he had committed. One frigid winter's day, Amelia received a lead that reignited her hope again. A small town in a foreign country, a place where David had been reportedly seen. With what little money she had managed to save, she booked a flight and made the journey, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The town was quaint and picturesque, a stark contrast to the bustling city life she was used to. Amelia wandered through its narrow streets, her eyes scanning for any sign of David. She found a small, modest house on the outskirts of town, where the lead suggested David might be living. It was late afternoon when Amelia approached the house. Her heart sank as she saw David playing with two young children in the yard. The sight was both heartwarming and gut-wrenching. David had remarried and was living a life she had once dreamed of, one that now seemed completely out of reach. Amelia watched from a distance, her jealousy mingling with a profound sense of loss. The new wife, a woman with a kind face, seemed to be everything Amelia had never been. The children laughed and played, their joy a stark reminder of what Amelia had lost. Summoning her courage, Amelia decided it was time to confront David. She waited until he was alone, walking home from work one evening. As he approached the house, Amelia stepped forward, her heart racing. "David," she called out, her voice trembling. "David, it's me. I've been searching for you for so long." David stopped in his tracks, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. For a moment, his face was a mix of confusion and cold detachment. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he took in Amelia's worn appearance. "What are you doing here?" David asked, his voice icy. "I came to find you," Amelia said, her voice cracking. "I need to talk to you. I've been through so much. Please, let's talk. Let's start over." David's face remained impassive. "There's nothing to talk about, bitch. You made your choices. You walked away from everything." Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she reached out, hoping to bridge the gap between them. "Please, David. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" David's gaze was unyielding. "I've moved on. I'm happy now, and you should do the same. There's nothing left here for you." His words were a final blow, leaving Amelia standing alone in the fading light. Her dreams of reconciliation and justice had crumbled, leaving her with nothing but the bitter reality of her choices. With a heavy heart, Amelia turned and walked away, the weight of her past and the burden of her future pressing down on her. The town's cold winter wind seemed to echo her sense of loss as she made her way back to the shelter where she was staying. As the days went by, Amelia grappled with the reality of her situation. The search for David had ended in disappointment, but she remained resilient. She had endured so much, and though her journey had not ended as she had hoped, she was determined to find a way forward. The long search had come to an end, but Amelia's story was far from over. She had faced the harshest of realities and survived, and now she had to navigate the path ahead with newfound strength and resolve. Amelia stood in the park, feeling the crushing weight of David's rejection. For years, she had clung to the hope that she could somehow undo her mistakes, that there might be a way to win him back. But now, as she stared at his indifferent face, it became clear that the life she once knew was irretrievably lost. With a heavy heart, Amelia wandered aimlessly through the small town. Her mind was a swirl of shattered dreams and missed opportunities. She found herself drawn to a quiet park that overlooked the ocean. The rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below provided a hauntingly soothing backdrop to her turmoil. Amelia took a seat on a weathered bench, its surface cold beneath her. She stared out at the horizon, the endless expanse of water reflecting the orange and pink hues of the setting sun. The sight was both beautiful and melancholy, a fitting metaphor for her fractured life. Her tears started to fall, unbidden and relentless. There was no one around to witness her despair, just her and the vast, indifferent ocean. The years of struggle and heartbreak seemed to culminate in this single, profound moment of solitude. Her thoughts were a jumble of regret and resignation. She had lost everything: her home, her money, her dignity. Her husband had found a new life. Her lover had left her when she needed him most, and now she had nothing left. As the darkness settled over the park, Amelia's emotions began to shift. A strange sense of calm settled over her, mingling with her sorrow. For the first time in years, she felt a release from the relentless pressure and despair that had driven her. She was utterly alone, but in that solitude, she found a peculiar form of peace. She closed her eyes, focusing on the sounds of the ocean. The gentle roar of the waves, the distant calls of seabirds, and the whisper of the wind became a symphony of resignation. It was as if the ocean itself was offering her solace, a final lullaby before the end. Her thoughts wandered back to the decisions that had led her here. The choices she had made, the paths she had taken, all seemed to converge in this moment. The luxurious life she had once lived now felt like a distant, almost mythical past. The people who had been part of that life, David, Nick, were now mere shadows, their significance reduced to memories that offered little comfort. Amelia's mind drifted to the idea of letting go. She had fought so hard to hold on to a life that had slipped through her fingers. But now, faced with the unchangeable reality of her situation, she felt an unexpected sense of liberation. The fight had left her weary, and the idea of surrendering to the finality of her situation brought a sense of quiet relief. As the night deepened, the park grew quieter. The few remaining visitors trickled out, leaving Amelia in complete solitude. She remained on the bench, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had no more fights left in her, no more dreams to chase. The world beyond the park would go on, indifferent to her plight. A passerby, a local man with a dog, stopped briefly, casting a concerned glance in Amelia's direction. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Amelia looked up, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I'm fine," she managed to say. "Just needed some time alone." The man nodded, though his expression was one of concern. He continued on his way, leaving Amelia to her thoughts. The fleeting encounter did little to change her resolve. She was ready to let go, to release the burden of her past and the pain that came with it. The darkness of the night seemed to close in around her, a comforting embrace that promised an end to her suffering. Amelia took a deep breath, savoring the last moments of clarity she felt. She had spent so long grappling with the weight of her decisions and the consequences of her actions. Now, it was time to find peace. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling heavy and unsteady. She took one last look at the ocean, the waves now cloaked in darkness. The sight was both serene and final, a fitting end to her long journey. With a deep sense of resignation, Amelia began to walk away from the bench, her steps slow and deliberate. As she left the park and wandered into the night, Amelia felt a profound sense of closure. The world would continue without her, and perhaps in the grand scheme of things, that was for the best. The struggles and heartbreak that had defined her recent years were now behind her. The future was uncertain, but for now, she embraced the quietude that came with acceptance. Amelia's final decision was made. The life she had once known was gone, and with it, the hope of reclaiming it. But as she faced the end of her journey, she found a semblance of peace in letting go. The world would go on, and perhaps, in its own way, it would be better off without the echoes of her past.